Welcome. I've been talking about this one for about a month, so you guys are not surprised that I have Dr. Michael Mann here because I've been reading Science Under Siege, and it has just informed all my arguments almost in the last month. And so I'm so thrilled to have Dr. Mann here. Dr. Mann, welcome.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I'm going to be like right off the bat, this book, the minute I started reading it, it started to remind me of the indignation and anger I felt reading Dark Money, which was a while ago now. And then as I kept reading your book, I was like, oh, because they are so intertwined. So why don't we dive right into it? You are a climate scientist, a world renowned one at that. You're known for the hockey stick graph, which sort of uh, informed the public as to just the dire straits that we were in with climate change, but also upset, I guess, the forces that want to fight against that. And your life has not quite been the same ever since. You've been the target of quite a few attacks, if I'm not mistaken.
No, that's right. And in fact, Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, has a whole chapter on my sort of the assault that I was faced with because of fossil fuel interests and those advocating for them who didn't like our scientific findings that really sort of laid bare the unprecedented nature of the warming that we're causing.
Exactly. And so, I mean, that said, the warming that we're causing is undeniable. The source of it is undeniable, and that is mankind burning fossil fuels. Let's just be clear about that right off the top.
That's right. I mean, that's the starting point, right? Whether it's climate change, a problem that we have caused, or pandemics, which, a problem where science has advised us as to how we can protect ourselves from this threat. And unfortunately, again, there are these ideologically driven groups, individuals who, for various reasons, find the science inconvenient to their political or ideological agenda. And so, once again, whether it's climate science, the sort of science that I do, or the sort of the vaccine research that my co-author Peter Hotez does, there is this common element, which is ideologically motivated efforts to undermine public faith in the science.
Absolutely. And I will say that I've been for some time now saying, as I debate Trump and the Trump administration with people, that sometimes I'll get optimistic people that say, hey, we've been here before. Society has been pulling apart before. And I always used to say, yeah, but the planet wasn't trying to kill us at the same time. But thanks to your book, I now say the planet wasn't trying to kill us, and the threat of a definitely incoming pandemic. You've only made me less optimistic and more pessimistic in the reading of this book, and I realize the stakes are about as high as they could possibly be.
Yeah, they are. And, there's a third leg to that stool if you like, this sort of three-legged stool of existential threats that we face, the climate crisis, ever more deadly pandemics, and now this overriding threat. And Peter and I talk about this quite a bit in the book, of anti-science disinformation, and the
Absolutely.
weaponization of social media and our information ecosystem in a way that makes it almost impossible for us to address any of these challenges that we face. That's sort of where we are.
Right. And let's dive into the disinformation, because the thing that struck me first in reading your book, which I have promoted on this show for the last month because it was a game changer for me. It was a perspective changer for me. And so I thank you, both you and Dr. Hotez, for writing it. But the thing that struck me was the proponents of climate denial don't actually believe it, or at least the sources of, starting with Exxon in the 1970s, where their own climate
That's
scientists
right.
said that we are changing the climate for the worse. And I think you've pointed out on several of the shows I've watched you on that they use the word like catastrophically or something like that, right?
Yeah, they refer to potentially catastrophic events. And this is in a report that ExxonMobil's own scientists published back in 1982, decades ago. And of course, what are we seeing now? What did we see just a little over a week ago with the landfall of a catastrophic hurricane on Jamaica. We're seeing those, not just potentially, those actual catastrophic events.
Right. And the disinformation is overwhelming, but it did occur to me, and I wanted to ask you about this because that was the 1980s. So it seems to me that the people at Exxon and those scientists were fully aware that they were lying and that they were manipulating the data. But they went out and they informed a portion of the population who then had children and informed their kids. And so now we're like third generation science deniers, and we're actually away from the source of the people that knew they were lying.
Yeah,
And we've entered a realm where these people are dyed in the wool. It's their religion. Science denial is their religion.
yeah.
And I think it makes it so much harder to combat.
Yeah, that's right, because it's ideological in nature. It's not about the facts. It's not about the science. It's about them working backward to a set of assumptions that they have to make in order for them to justify their worldview, their ideology. If the climate crisis is real, then we have to get off fossil fuels. We've got to stop digging the hole deeper and deeper with the burning of fossil fuels. And that is very inconvenient to powerful vested interests. And they've created this whole ecosystem, this elaborate climate denial machine, that the intent of which is to keep a large segment of our population in ignorance, and to promote misinformation and disinformation. They're not the villains. The person on the street who thinks that climate change is a hoax, they're the victim of an orchestrated disinformation campaign by, as you say, folks who know better, folks who know that the science is solid, but that it's a threat to their economic interest, their financial interest, or their ideological interest.
Absolutely. And which brings me to another thing that was shocking to me because I was not surprised at all to learn that climate denial is in many ways funded by one Mr. Vladimir Putin because he runs a petrol state. And you talk about the forces that you're fighting against here, which are the
Yeah,
plutocrats, the petrol states, the pros, the propagandists, and the press.
that's right.
And that is the narrative of the book. But I was surprised that Vladimir Putin was also behind vaccine denial and
Yeah.
pandemic denial because
Maybe
it was,
Putin should have been a separate P in that group of P words and in fact, there are also the politicians and the politicians, and the polluters,
yeah,
if you want to
big
add two
time.
more P's, which are sort of part of the petrostate. Petrostates are countries whose policies are dictated by extraction, in particular fossil fuel extraction. And so obviously the polluters, and the politicians are part of that petrostate. But
I'll
you're
give you one more, the podcasters.
That's right. Not all podcasters, for sure.
Yeah.
There's some good podcasters. We have an example right in front of us, but there have been some extremely damaging individuals within the podcast world. Joe Rogan being perhaps most prominent of them, who has promoted anti-science about climate and clean energy, and has promoted anti-science about vaccines and COVID-19, sort of equal opportunity promotion of anti-science. The P words are legion. They keep coming. But
Yeah.
the bottom line is these are a set of bad actors who in many cases are collaborating, working together to oppose the actions that we need to take.
Right. And if we could just talk for a second about why Vladimir Putin, because I was surprised why he went with the anti lockdown,
Yeah.
which led directly into the anti vax movement. And that had to do, again, with his bottom line, which was the petrol state, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's sort of fascinating. It's obvious why the Koch brothers, these plutocrats, who are, the largest, own the largest petrochemical company in the world. So it's the largest publicly held fossil fuel interest. The Koch brothers are also these libertarian activists who have used, their immense wealth to create a whole ecosystem of anti-science, that that sort of supports their financial agenda and supports their political agenda. And so they have a libertarian philosophy, a philosophy that regulation is bad, and you know, Vladimir Putin, a similar motive. For Russia to sort of succeed in the 21st century economy, it's a country whose primary economic asset is its fossil fuels. It's an extractionist country. It's a petro state. And the only way it gets ahead, the only way it can continue to prosper economically, as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned, is for the world to remain addicted to the fossil fuels that Russia is extracting and selling on the world market. And so it is necessary, in his view, to prevent any meaningful action from taking place. The same thing with Saudi Arabia, another petrostate. Russia and Saudi Arabia have played a very damaging role when it comes to these international climate conferences like COP30, which is currently going
Happening
on in
right now.
Brazil. There's this coalition of petrostates, Saudi Arabia and Russia, principal among them, but the United States, under the current Trump administration, we'd have to put it in that same category. And in fact, the United States doesn't even have a delegation at COP30. They're completely disengaged. So Putin, his agenda is a continued reliance on fossil fuels by the rest of the world. And for Russia to succeed politically, it needs a destabilized West. It can't have Western countries working together to promote democracy, because it is it is an authoritarian country. Democracy is a threat to Russia, so it can't allow the West to sort of. It has to undermine the ability of Western nations to work together to further the cause of global democracy, and it has to work against the efforts by Western nations to move off of fossil fuels towards clean energy. So there are actually several different underlying factors that have led Russia under Vladimir Putin to take this adversarial role, not just on climate change, but to create as much, basically, with COVID-19, a pandemic in the spreading through the United States is destabilizing to the United States. This is a destabilizing force, and Putin supports the destabilization of the West. That I think that's part of his agenda. He, also, for sort of for Putin, like authoritarianism to survive, it sort of needs conflict. It needs the West to be mired in conflict and to reject authority, to reject expertise. A world where there are no experts is a world in which the promoters of misinformation and disinformation can prosper. And that really is Russia's model. So it's sort of interesting how these things came together, how Russia, how the Koch brothers all ended up not just promoting anti-science with climate and renewable energy. We understand why they're doing that, but also why they decided to adopt this sort of destabilizing anti-science framing of global pandemics and COVID-19 and vaccines.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to anyone that's looked into Russian disinformation is that they do play both sides because they're trying to get Americans to fight. That for
Exactly.
as much as they pushed Donald Trump, they also were pushing Bernie Sanders and creating lies on the side of the left as well in order to destabilize our
Exactly.
democracy. But
Exactly.
Vladimir Putin is such a perfect example of how this is just total nonsense, obviously, and they all know it because in the West, he pushes science denial, and in Russia, he pushes climate change is real, but it's good for us.
That's
Russia will
exactly right.
benefit from climate change.
Yeah, that's precisely right. And he has made this argument, which is, so clearly he is promoting different narratives to different groups, and that sort of speaks to the intellectually dishonest nature of how Putin and Russia are engaging. But even this idea that Russia will benefit from warming is disingenuous, because he well knows that vast crops have been destroyed by extreme weather events, by floods and wildfires in Russia. So this idea that, well, a warmer world is a more prosperous world where we have a longer growing season and we will, benefit agriculturally. That argument just doesn't hold water anymore, but it's the sort of argument you'll hear coming from somebody like Putin.
Exactly. And Russia is actually an incredible example of what this anti science sort of dogmatic belief will do to
That's
the
right.
average person, because we had Lysenko, who was Stalin's favorite, I guess, I'm not sure, botanist, what exactly he was, but he proposed an idea that they could make a hardier version of Russian wheat by exposing it to snow or cold or something like that.
Right. It was a
And
version of Lamarckianism, right?
yeah,
This like pseudoscientific competitor to Darwinian evolution, that organisms evolve by taking on characteristics during their lifetimes. And as you say, so this idea that, well, if you expose the Russian wheat to cold, it will become hardier in response to that. It's pseudoscience, it's Lamarckianism in a different form, and it led to widespread famines in Russia. It also led to the jailing of scientists who were willing to push back against that dogma.
yeah, and with where America is right now with RFK Jr. and such, and the Trump administration, I hear echoes of that. But before I get to that, I did
Absolutely.
want to just point out that something that occurs to me from time to time when thinking about climate change is that we kind of are really on a knife's edge, because we are one volcano away from push. Like, we talk about climate change only in terms of fossil fuels, but anyone has studied, like, geology and the deep history of the planet Earth knows that we came out of an ice age because of volcanic activity and the amount of CO2 that just a volcano, which I don't know that we can predict all that well when it might happen, could actually just push us to, I mean, Venus level of global warming. Is that not correct?
Not quite. I would.
Okay.
It's funny because my last book, Our Fragile Moment, is actually about the lessons that we can learn from Earth history when it comes to the climate crisis. It gets into all of these things. Um, and I talk quite a bit about the role of long-term volcanic outgassing. It's why there have been past periods like the early Cretaceous period, and anytime you see like an artist's reconstruction of the early Cretaceous when dinosaurs were warming, dinosaurs were roaming the planet, you inevitably see erupting volcanoes in the background. You always see that.
Yeah.
And it's true, on geological timescales, changes in volcanic activity have raised CO2 levels of carbon dioxide to very high levels that persisted, say, 100 million years ago during the early Cretaceous. Um, it's a small factor on human timescales. So we're talking about something that over 100 million years can make a big difference. And in fact, what happened over the last 100 million years, just as increases in volcanic activity can raise CO2 levels, plate tectonics and the rising of mountain ranges and the impact that has on weathering of carbon dioxide, there are these long-term cycles in the Earth's carbon cycle that can actually draw down CO2 again on timescales, on geological timescales of 100 million years. And what's going on right now, and this puts it in perspective. So all of that carbon that built up in the atmosphere from an excess of volcanic outgassing and then came down over the last 100 million years because plate tectonics sort of kicked in, ramped up, and sort of drew down that CO2. And that's why you get variations over geologic time. That took 100 million years for nature to bury all of that CO2 that was in the atmosphere 100 million years ago during the early Cretaceous. And what we're doing is we're digging up all of that carbon that Mother Nature buried over 100 million years, and we're putting it back into the atmosphere on a time scale of 100 years, a million times faster. And there is no precedent in Earth history for something like that.
Yeah, that just it's so scary. And okay, so I was a little off on the volcano thing, so let
But it
me
allowed us to
entertain.
get into an important part of the story. Yeah.
Yeah, but let me throw one more at you, which is the melting of the permafrost, which contains the methane, which is a much more potent greenhouse
Yeah.
gas. Is that not an accelerator that should be taken into account when looking at climate models? Because it seems to me that once that runaway train starts to happen, we could be in a really scary place.
Yeah, that is a factor. And there's a debate within the scientific community about like how close we are to the point where that becomes a significant player. We don't yet see evidence of a massive buildup of methane in the atmosphere from natural gas extraction. Sorry, from these feedback mechanisms like permafrost melting. What we are seeing is a rise in methane from fracking, natural gas extraction, fossil fuel extraction. And so we can actually tell where the methane is coming from its isotopic composition. Basically, the isotopes of carbon are different for sort of biogenic permafrost melting methane that comes from that source, and from fossil fuel methane of the sort that's being extracted. Natural gas is mostly methane. So that is a factor that could kick in, that could amplify warming. I'm actually more concerned right now about another type of carbon cycle feedback, is what we call these. The massive wildfires that we see summer after
Yeah.
summer now, that's putting a lot more carbon into the atmosphere. And so we're now starting to see, like the Amazon rainforest, which for so long has been an important carbon sink. It actually takes carbon collectively out of the atmosphere and buries it. We're now looking at a situation where within a decade or two, that sink could actually become a source. The Amazon could be adding carbon to the atmosphere. And so we do have to worry about these. We call them positive feedbacks, but it's not a good thing. It's not
Yeah.
like the positive feedback you get from your boss for doing a good job. This is a bad thing. This is an amplifying effect. And it's a reminder that, if anything, uncertainty is our enemy. It's not our friend. The critics love to point to scientific uncertainty, say, hey, we don't know all the answers, so we shouldn't do anything. It's just the opposite. Because we don't know all the answers, some of these impacts may end up being worse than we've predicted. And we're seeing evidence of that with the collapse of ice sheets that's happening earlier than we expected, with extreme weather events that are more extreme than what the models predicted. So uncertainty is not our friend here, and it's certainly not a reason for inaction.
Right. And you talk about that there has been something of a shift in these anti-science forces where it was denial, but now one of the tools in their tool belt is doom.
Yeah.
To just convince people it's too late, there's nothing you can do about it, almost just ride this thing out.
Yeah. Well, so you could probably tell I'm a sucker for alliteration. So with the current
Yeah.
book, it's the plutocrats, it's the petrostates, it's the pros, the propagandists, and the press. 2 books ago, my book, The New Climate War, was precisely about what you're talking about. And I talked about the tactics now as we get away from outright denial, because, I mean, in the world of AI now, you can't quite trust your own eyes. But most people can still see with their own 2 eyes. They can see that it's happening, that climate change, the impacts, we're feeling the consequences. So it's just not credible to deny that climate change is happening, or even that human activity is responsible for it. So there are these other D words. As the critics, as the bad actors move away from denial as a primary tactic towards other tactics like division, delay, deflection, and indeed doomism, which is ironic, right? If they can convince, climate people are concerned about climate change. So we're not talking about climate deniers. We're not talking about people on the right side of the spectrum who are opposed to climate action for because they don't believe it's real. They think it's a plot to take away. We're talking about people, progressives potentially, who actually are really concerned about climate change. But if they become convinced that, hey, you know what, it's too late to do anything anyway, well, then they're probably going to focus on other problems where they think they can make a difference. And so what's so punitive, what's so pernicious about this particular tactic, fanning the flames of doomism, bad actors who are opposed to climate action actually fanning the flames of climate doomism because they want to weaponize doomism. They want to convince environmental progressives that, hey, it's too late to do anything anyways. Because if you really become convinced we can't do anything, it leads you down this path of disengagement, to use another D word. And so we have to be aware of this shift in tactics, and doomism is actually one of them. We, as I like to say, we have to recognize, we have to sort of pair our sense of urgency with a sense of agency, that it's not too late to do something.
Yeah, and another thing I've seen, at least on the internet, is they'll say that it is real, it is happening, but now we're at the point where we need a free market solution. We need Elon Musk to build a giant machine to get the carbon out of the atmosphere, and so it's just win-win for them. They get to burn the
Oh
oil,
yeah.
they get to enrich Elon Musk, and more trillionaires, more billionaires, and that just seems like a terrible idea to me. But it's more doomism.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of corollary, almost, of that. I don't know if you saw the film "Don't Look Up" by
I
Adam
I did.
McKay. Yeah, so it's an allegory, of course, about the climate crisis, masquerading as a story about a comet that's going to hit Earth. And what Adam is talking about is climate change is the comet, and "Don't Look Up" is like ignore the problem, which too many
Yeah.
politicians. And it's just a brilliant film because by making it a comet, you can actually get people to start to think about the climate crisis in a different way, because they don't feel like they're being hit over the head necessarily with climate messaging. It's this story about a comet. And if you understand the story, you understand the players, the protagonists, the villains, and the heroes, then you're really well prepared to understand the parallel with climate denial. And one of my favorite components of the film. I don't want to give things away for viewers, listeners who haven't seen it. But there is this villain character, and he's an Elon Musk slash Bill Gates like technocrat, tech bro, who in fact, is we don't need to destroy the asteroid, the comet. I have this proprietary technology. We can break it up into pieces. Oh, and by the way, I have these drones that'll drill the pieces and recover the valuable minerals, the valuable ore, and all that goes to my company. So it was a metaphor for this geoengineering idea, this idea that we can engineer our way out of the problem, which is very popular with the Bill Gateses of the world, with the Elon Musks of the world. Hey, look, we can continue to burn fossil fuels. We'll just do something else to the planet to offset it. What could possibly go wrong, right?
Yeah. And that I know your time is valuable, so I'm just going to ask you one more question, because as they do switch their stories and they change that, there you did mention chemtrails in your chapter on
Yeah.
conspiracy theories, but just I think maybe the other day, Tucker Carlson had a guy on who was saying that their news story about chemtrails is that it is actually to combat climate change, that they're releasing aluminum particulate matter or something that will reflect the sun back up. And that's actually what now chemtrails used to be. I can't remember what they were originally, but something nefarious. But now they've switched it to it's
That's
climate
right.
scientists that are sowing chemtrails. So I mean, is
Yeah.
that even a thing? Is that even possible to do chemtrails to deflect the sun's rays back into?
So the chemtrails, first of all, are actually contrails.
Yeah.
They're just condensed water vapor that comes out of a jet engine when it burns fuel. It produces water vapor, and it's cold up there, so the water vapor condenses like a cloud. It's a contrail, but they become convinced that, wait a second, these streaks. And they're always behind these airplanes. What are these airplanes doing to produce? So it generates some of the most ridiculous conspiracy theories, and that's where chemtrails came from. This idea that they're spraying chemicals, who knows, chemicals that'll control our minds, chemicals. And now you're right, it's sort of morphed, because anytime, look, it's a conspiracy theory that the bad actors have convinced their base, their conspiratorial ideationist base of. And now that that conspiracy is out there, they can mold it for whatever purpose they might need. And so now you're exactly right, saying, oh, yeah, those who are promoting, and by the way, this stuff actually goes to back to 2010. A lot of these conspiracy theories originated with Russian state propaganda, and
Not
so
surprised.
and now it's flourished, and they have played a role in promoting these conspiracy theories, and they can use them for whatever purpose, right? So now they're using it for, oh, it's because they're doing geoengineering. Now, what's interesting there is there's a little bit of internal conflict within the sort of anti-climate action coalition, because a lot of the fossil fuel companies actually like geoengineering, right? It's a crutch. It's a get out of jail free card. It's like, hey, look, we can continue to extract and burn fossil fuels because we've got this technology that we're going to deploy to offset the effect of that. So a lot of the polluters, the petrostates, the plutocrats, they like geoengineering, but now they have this base, the MAGA base, that has been weaponized with these conspiracy theories to now oppose geoengineering. And the irony is that what they're seeing in the sky isn't geoengineering. Now, it is true that there are schemes, and Bill Gates actually has financed these very schemes to shoot sulfur dioxide reflective particles into the stratosphere to block out some of the sunlight to offset the warming effect of increasing carbon pollution. And so that much is true. And there is actually a contingent within the scientific community that wants to do field experiments, that wants to start to deploy this. So that's the sort of very small grain of truth to this conspiracy theory. That is all true, but nobody is doing it yet. Nobody's implementing it. And those streaks in the sky, those are contrails. That's condensed water vapor that comes out the back of a jet engine, like we've seen ever since jet engines, jets have been up in the stratosphere.
Yeah, it seems that for their conspiracy theory to work, they would have to believe that we've been trying to combat climate change since what, the late 40s, early 50s. That's when the first jets came around.
Exactly. But no, those might have been contrails, but these are chemtrails.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the conspiracy must go wider and deeper is sort of, that is all too often that's what we see, rather than recognizing the internal contradiction within their conspiratorial understanding of the world. They just decide, well, okay, we need to extend the conspiracy. It's got to go farther. It's got to go deeper.
Yeah, and I guess in closing, it seems to me that when I look at the world, the number one thing that threatens the world is not any given specific conspiracy theory. It's just people believing things without evidence, and that is what we need to change. Is people have to adopt an evidence-based worldview, and only therein do I see optimism. Do you see any optimism in the world today?
I do. Because the obstacles are still only political. They're not physical. They're not technological. We can do this. The only obstacle is political, and I like to believe that we can overcome political obstacles. A week ago, there was some indication that maybe we can. See what happens over the next 3-4 years. And so, from that standpoint, I am optimistic. Although I have to say that this I'm trying to remember what the point you were making. What was it that your optimism, you said, was
Well,
motivated
the
by
only optimism I believe we could have is if people began to adopt a evidence-based
like
worldview
critical,
and
yeah,
adopt
critical thinking?
skepticism. Without
Yeah,
that, I think we're doomed because
yeah,
it'll
no,
just
that's
turn
right.
into a million different things. As long as people believe things without evidence, we'll never be able to put out all the little fires.
Yeah, and Carl Sagan spoke so eloquently to this in the Demon Haunted World decades ago. He sort of prophesized a future like the one that we're in now, where
Yeah, he
people
did.
be uncritically, fall victim to conspiracy theories, and all too small a number of people, that all of that technology is in the hands of a small number of people with their own particular ideologies and agendas. So he saw this coming. He also was greatly concerned about the erosion of critical thinking. That was what played into this. But people lose the tools for critical thinking, and in that environment, again, the bad actors flourish. Unfortunately, we have yet another weapon. They have another weapon in a very potent weapon. And I talk about this in the book, now at their disposal, which is AI.
Yep.
And the way that AI is now being used to massively promote disinformation, and and I see this with my own students, there's a real threat right now to sort of critical thinking, which is that we're outsourcing our critical thinking increasingly to ChatGPT, to AI, large language models, chatbots. And there's a whole generation of people who are sort of outsourcing that whole process of critical thinking to machines to platforms that are in the hands of that same small number of plutocrat billionaire tech bros, tech lords. And so that there one can see optimism, but one can also see other sort of new layers of concern, new challenges that we have to face. And I think that is the defining challenge now, because we're not going to be able to act on any of the problems that we face if we can't solve that problem. The rapid dissemination of misinformation and disinformation, and the way that it is being weaponized and spread now using new technologies, that is the greatest threat that we face. And we have to sort of keep our eye on the prize.
Yes, we do. Forget AI and go with good old fashioned I. And it was a lot of intelligence that went into the writing of Science Under Siege by my guest, Dr. Michael Mann and Dr. Peter Hotez. And I thank you so much for your time, Dr. Mann.
Thank you, Michael. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. And if you don't mind,